Hello, everyone. Every night we walk through the dust of history, every forgotten disaster, and tonight we step onto a battlefield carved into the roof of the world. You breathe in the thin air of the Italian Alps, and it bites back like glass in your lungs. It is 1916, and frostbite kills faster than bullets here. Entire armies vanish into white nothingness. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you really like what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and what time it is. The snow under your boots creaks like old bones, every step a whisper to the mountain that you are trespassing. Behind you, the trail disappears into swirling powder. The wind whistles low, curling around your ears as if the peaks themselves are speaking. You can't see the enemy, but you can feel them. Somewhere beyond the ridge, freezing just like you, huddled in ice-cut trenches. The war down here is fought with rifles and shells. Up here, the real enemy is the cold itself. In the dugout, the walls are not walls at all, just snow pressed hard by hands gone numb. A tin mug of coffee steams briefly before the cold steals it away. The men around you speak in whispers, not because of discipline, but because the air feels too thin for wasted words. Every so often, a far-off boom echoes. Not artillery, but the mountains shifting under its own weight. It is the kind of sound that makes you grip your rifle tighter without even thinking. You remember hearing about the avalanche that took 30 men from the other side just last week. It came without warning, a rushing white shadow that smothered everything in its path. No screams, no gunfire, just a sudden silence where life used to be. Some soldiers say that if you stand out here long enough at night, you can see faces in the snowdrifts, watching. Whether it's frost playing tricks or something else, no one wants to find out. Your breath crystallizes instantly, drifting away in tiny frozen feathers. The moonlight reflects off the snow, making the world look like a glass ornament you could shatter with a single tap. Somewhere nearby, a sentry stomps his feet to keep the blood flowing, but he is losing the battle. You know the stories, the ones where a man falls asleep in the snow and never wakes up. Here, there are no warning signs. One moment you're shivering, the next the cold simply stops. Rations taste like cardboard, and the bread has to be cut with a knife you've warmed in your hands. Water comes from melted snow, always smelling faintly of gun oil. Even the simplest tasks, tying a boot, lighting a cigarette, feel like small wars of their own. Sometimes the men joke to keep from thinking about it. When the cold finally wins, at least we won't have to ride home anymore. It gets a laugh, but only once. Every shadow on the slope feels too still, every shape too perfect. You think of the line you heard earlier, "The mountain keeps who it wants." It's said with the same tone as you talk about a god or a king, something that doesn't negotiate. Somewhere above, frost-clad cliffs gleam under the moon, ancient and patient. If the war ends tomorrow, these mountains will still be here, watching, deciding. You wrap your coat tighter and glance toward the ridge, where the wind pulls streamers of snow into the night sky. The stars look close enough to touch, but you keep your hands buried deep in your pockets. Somewhere in your chest, you can feel the weight of this place. The kind that will outlast bullets, politics, and the names of every man who ever dared to stand here. And deep down, you suspect the mountain has already chosen who will stay. You wake before dawn, not because of orders, but because the cold has chased you from sleep. The sky is still dark, but faint silver edges creep along the peaks, hinting at another day. You grab a pickaxe and shovel, joining the line of men carving a trench into the frozen slope. The snow is packed like cement, each strike sending a shiver up your arm. Behind you, someone mutters that digging into ice is like digging into the bones of the earth itself. Slow, unyielding, and unwilling to give up anything it has taken. The rumble starts low, almost like the growl of a far-off engine. You stop mid-swing, your breath hanging in the air. It isn't artillery, you've learned the difference. This is longer, deeper, a sound that moves through the ground under your boots. An avalanche somewhere high above. The men glance at each other, no words exchanged. You all know the rule. Keep working, but keep your ears open. Avalanches can run for miles, and the snow here has no mercy. The officer walks along the trench, his mustache rimed with frost, eyes scanning the slope like a gambler reading cards. He knows this mountain has moods. Sometimes it sits in still silence. Sometimes it shifts without warning. You overhear him tell a sergeant that the snowpack is layered wrong this year. Too much early ice, too much new powder. Historians are still debating whether the avalanches in this war killed more men than the enemy ever did. But here, it isn't a debate. Everyone knows the answer. A chunk of ice cracks from the wall you've been cutting and tumbles into the trench. It makes a dull, heavy thud as it lands. You pick it up and toss it aside, watching it roll away into the drift. The sound it makes is swallowed instantly by the snow. Up here, noise doesn't travel far. It just folds into the white. The only exception is the avalanche's roar. That sound runs like fire through dry wood, unstoppable once it starts. By midday, the trench walls rise high enough to block some of the wind. The men stand shoulder to shoulder, working without much talk, breath forming a steady mist. You can feel the fatigue in your back, the sting in your fingertips, but stopping isn't an option. The trench is both shelter and trap, deep enough to hide you from bullets, but if snow comes down, it can bury you before you can climb out. That thought hangs in the air, unspoken but present. Lunch is a handful of frozen bread and a wedge of cheese, eaten standing up with your back against the icy wall. Somewhere far up the mountain, another avalanche lets go, and the sound rolls down like thunder over water. You can't see it, but you can imagine it. A churning wall of snow and ice, snapping trees and swallowing rocks whole. The men glance upward, a quick instinct, then return to chewing. The mountain will decide if it comes for you. By late afternoon, the trench is long enough for the men to move along it in single file. You can see where it curves toward a cluster of snow huts, their walls stacked with sandbags half buried in ice. This is the front line, not a roar of guns, but a frozen chessboard where every move takes hours to make. The enemy is somewhere beyond the ridge, working their own shovels, fighting their own avalanches. You imagine them pausing at the same rumbles you hear, looking over their shoulders at the same sky. As night falls, the wind picks up, hurling stinging needles of snow against your face. You hunker in the trench, pickaxe resting against your shoulder. The darkness closes in fast here, swallowing the last of the day's light. Somewhere high above, the snow shifts again, and you think you hear a distant crack. It's not loud, but it's enough to remind you. You're not just digging into the mountain, you're digging into its patience. The night is deep and still when the first smell drifts toward you. Wood smoke, faint and almost sweet in the frozen air. It doesn't belong here. There are no villages on this ridge, no shepherds tending fires. You know exactly what it is. The enemy's camp, somewhere beyond the next fold of the mountain. The wind shifts and carries the scent like a whispered confession, proof that men you can't see are alive and warming their hands just as you are trying to warm yours. The war feels smaller up here, the front line only as wide as a single gust of wind. You crouch low, peering over the trench's snow wall, but the moonlight reveals nothing but jagged shadows of rock and ridges of white. The mountain plays tricks with distance. What feels a few steps away could be half a mile. A fellow soldier mutters that he can hear voices, muffled and blurred, almost as if they're speaking through water. You strain your ears, but the only sound is the hiss of wind as it slides past your hood and down your neck. It's strange how close the enemy feels without a single rifle shot fired. A sentry passes by, his boots squeaking on packed snow, and leans over to whisper, "They're cooking something. Smells like stew." You can't tell if he's joking or if it's wishful thinking. Hunger plays tricks in this cold, and your rations feel like a punishment. You remember hearing of soldiers who traded food for cigarettes, even in places like this. But up here, you wouldn't trade your bread for anything that doesn't burn in your hands. Somewhere across that ridge, their bread is baking in steam, and the thought makes you shiver harder. The officer orders silence, not because of danger, but because sound carries strangely here. A single clank of metal can echo in unpredictable ways. You've heard the stories. Men lighting cigarettes in the glow giving them away. Conversations drifting across a mile and back again. Historians are still debating whether mountain warfare was more about waiting than fighting. Standing here, you know it's not a debate. It's a truth you can taste in the cold air. This war is fought in stolen breaths and measured silences. When the wind drops, the cold grows sharper. The silence feels unnatural, like the pause before a curtain rises. You imagine the enemy soldiers doing the same, listening, waiting, perhaps even wondering if you are closer than you are. If you shouted now, would they hear? Would they understand the words? The thought is absurd and dangerous. But in a place like this, strange ideas creep in like frost through the seams of your coat. A flare bursts somewhere down the slope, casting long, trembling shadows on the snow. It lasts only a moment, but it lights up enough to show movement. A line of dark figures adjusting something heavy. You can't tell if they saw you too. The flare fades, and the darkness swallows everything again. The only proof of what you saw is the racing of your heart. You glance at the man next to you, but he just shrugs as if to say, better not to think about it. Hours pass in slow, heavy minutes. The smell of the enemy's campfire comes and goes with the wind, teasing you with invisible proximity. You wonder if they can smell yours too, if the exchange of scents is the closest thing to peace you'll have tonight. The mountains seem to hold their breath, and you hold yours with them, waiting for a sound, a movement, anything to break the stalemate. But the night gives you nothing except the reminder that they are there, close enough to smell, far enough to remain unseen. Finally, the wind picks up again, sweeping away the last trace of smoke. The air returns to its empty chill, and you are left with nothing but the sound of your own breathing. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the enemy settles into their own cold trenches. You adjust your scarf, pull your coat tighter, and return your eyes to the white horizon, knowing that up here, even the air itself is a message. And tonight, the message is, wait. It begins as a passing remark over a tin cup of coffee, steam curling upward into the brittle morning air. One soldier leans in and mutters, "The mountain keeps who it wants." No one laughs. No one asks what he means. In a place like this, such words are not superstition but simple observation. Men vanish here, not always in battle, sometimes just stepping out into the storm and never coming back. You drink in silence, feeling the weight of the phrase settle on your shoulders like another layer of snow. The story makes its way along the trench, reshaped in each telling. Some say the mountain decides before a man even arrives. Others claim it tests you, watching for weakness. You've heard of patrols swallowed by fog so thick they might as well have walked into another world. Somewhere out there, their rifles and boots lie exactly as they fell, frozen into the slope. It's easy to picture the mountain standing over them, patient as stone, waiting for the next. When the wind dies down, the silence feels almost like a held breath. That's when you start to notice the shapes. Drifted snow that looks just a little too much like a kneeling figure. Shadows caught in postures too human to ignore. A fellow soldier points one out to you, a ridge of ice with what could be a shoulder, a helmeted head. "See?" he says softly. "It chooses." You both stare for a long moment before looking away, as if turning your gaze might keep the mountain from noticing you. That night, the temperature drops so low the stars look sharp enough to cut your skin. You dream of walking through a field of frozen statues, soldiers mid-step, faces calm, eyes fixed on something you can't see. In the dream, your boots leave no tracks, and the snow underfoot makes no sound. You wake with your breath clouding in the dark, and the uneasy feeling that the dream wasn't entirely yours. The phrase becomes a kind of unspoken rule. No one whistles in the trench. No one says "see you later" when a man goes on patrol. Instead, they nod once, keep their eyes low, and let the silence have the last word. Historians are still debating whether such habits were born of fear or respect. But up here, the line between the two is too thin to matter. You follow the rituals without question because you've seen what happens when the mountain takes notice. Days pass and the weather turns crueler. Men vanish in whiteout so dense the world shrinks to the reach of your hand. Their names are read softly, almost as if speaking them too loudly might call the mountain's attention. The empty spaces they leave behind are quickly filled with new arrivals, each one unaware that the place they've inherited comes with invisible rules carved into the snow. One evening, as the sun slides behind the peaks, you see a shape at the far edge of the glacier. Upright, motionless. It could be a man. It could be ice. You raise your hand to point, but the officer stops you with a single shake of his head. "Let it be," he says. "That's not ours to touch." You lower your hand and say nothing more, but the image stays with you long into the night. By the next morning, the shape is gone, buried under fresh snow or moved by the wind. You can't be sure which. You keep your eyes on the ground, shovel in hand, the whispered phrase echoing in your mind. The mountain keeps who it wants. You don't know if that means you're safe or if it's only a matter of time. The morning begins with that strange kind of quiet you only get in the high mountains. No wind, no birds, just the creak of boots in the snow. You're standing in the trench, looking up at the ridge, when you hear it, a sharp, splitting crack that cuts straight through the air. It's not gunfire. It's deeper, older, like the mountain itself is pulling apart. You freeze in place, your breath hanging in the cold. Somewhere up there, the snow has decided to move. And when it moves, nothing stands in its way. For half a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the sound changes. A low rumble, building fast. It's not so much heard as felt, rolling through the frozen ground under your boots. Men drop their shovels, heads snapping toward the slope. There's no shouting yet. You all just stand there watching as the rumble grows into a roar, the kind that gets into your bones. This isn't a storm or artillery. This is the mountain waking up angry. Someone yells, "Avalanche!" and the spell breaks. Every man moves at once, scrambling for any kind of cover. You throw yourself toward the trench wall, snow exploding under your hands as you claw for stability. The air is already changing. It tastes colder, sharper, filled with fine powder shaken loose from somewhere high above. The sky is still clear, but the sound is close now, impossibly close. Then you see it. At first it's just a rolling white blur on the far slope, but it grows fast. A wall of snow taller than a house, moving like liquid lightning. It swallows rocks, trees, everything in its path. You don't think about the men up there. You don't think about anything except how fast it's coming and how small you are. A joke you heard once about outrunning snow feels ridiculous now. The first blast of wind hits before the snow does, knocking you sideways. It smells of ice and crushed pine, and it carries a fine sting that makes you squint. The roar is deafening now, a sound so loud it swallows every thought in your head. You press your body into the trench wall and hope the snow doesn't spill over. You've heard stories of avalanches burying trenches in seconds. Up here, stories like that aren't rumors. They're warnings. The wave of snow slams into the slope below, leaping over ridges like a living thing. The ground shakes under your knees. Somewhere to your left, a man cries out, but the sound is swallowed instantly. You can't see more than a few feet in front of you now. The air is thick with white. You're breathing snow and ice, trying not to panic as the world turns into a blizzard you can't escape. And then, just as suddenly, it's gone. The roar fades into a distant growl. The wind drops and the air clears. The slope above is unrecognizable. Smooth, blank, silent. The trench is half filled in places, but you're still standing. Not everyone is. Men call out names, digging with bare hands. The silence between the shouts feels heavier than the snow itself. You think of the ones who were up there, and you know, they're part of the mountain now. By nightfall, the story has already started to twist. Some say the snow fell because of shelling on the far side. Others say the mountain simply decided it was time. Historians are still debating whether this avalanche was the deadliest of the war. You know it doesn't matter. Numbers can't capture what it feels like when the world you're standing on decides to bury you alive. And up here, you can't stop wondering when it will decide again. The first seconds are pure instinct. You don't think, you just move. Snow crunches under your boots as you sprint toward the nearest overhang, your rifle banging awkwardly against your shoulder. The slope is alive now, roaring like an oncoming train. Men scatter in all directions, some diving into the trench, others vanishing behind ridges. It's chaos, but even chaos feels too small a word for what's coming down the mountain. You glance over your shoulder and instantly wish you hadn't. The avalanche is bigger than anything you imagine. The wall of snow isn't just white. It's streaked with broken tree trunks, splinters of rock, and a fine mist that hangs ahead of it like the breath of some massive beast. The sound pounds through your chest. making your heart skip beats. You try to shout to the man next to you, but the roar eats your voice whole. He's looking at you, wide-eyed, but you can't tell if he hears or even sees you anymore. You dive behind a snow wall just as the first spray hits, cold needles pricking your face. The air itself seems to solidify, pressing against you from all sides. You dig your gloves into the packed snow, hoping it holds, knowing it probably won't. Up here, nothing is stronger than the mountain's will. Historians like to talk about the bravery of soldiers in battle, but bravery feels like a useless concept when the entire landscape decides to attack. The impact is like being hit by a building. Snow slams into your back and shoulders, pinning you against the wall. You can't see, you can't hear. All you know is the crushing weight and the desperate fight to keep your mouth clear enough to breathe. The cold is absolute, not the sharp sting of winter air, but a deep, bone-heavy cold that feels older than time. You kick your legs, trying to stay near the surface, unsure which way is up. Somewhere in the blur, you feel movement beside you. Another soldier, struggling against the same weight. You grab at his arm, but the snow shifts between you, breaking the contact. The avalanche doesn't care about connection. It pulls you apart, swallows you separately. For a moment, you think this is it, that you'll become one of those shapes in the ice people talk about decades later. The thought is strangely calm, almost dreamlike. Then suddenly the pressure eases. The noise fades from a roar to a muffled hum. You push upward with everything you've got, breaking through into open air. The sky is a pale blur above you, your lungs burning as you drag in the freezing wind. Snow clings to your eyelashes, your coat, your very breath. You look around and see only fragments of the world you knew. The trench half buried, the overhang gone, men emerging like ghosts from the drifts. Some stand in shock, weapons hanging uselessly at their sides. Others dig with frantic hands, calling names that are swallowed by the stillness. The avalanche hasn't just buried men, it's erased the shape of the land itself. Where once there were paths and outcrops, there's now a smooth, endless slope. You realize you're standing in a place that didn't exist an hour ago. The mountain has rewritten itself, and you are just a footnote. That night, the silence is unbearable. Fires are kept small, as if the heat might offend the snow still looming above. You lie awake, replaying the sight of that white wave swallowing the world, wondering why you were spared. The others, the ones the mountain kept, are already freezing into history, their names fading with each passing hour. And in your chest, you know the mountain isn't done yet. When the avalanche finally passes, the world doesn't sound the same. It's as if the mountain has taken every noise and locked it away in some vault of ice. You stand there, chest heaving, and realize you can hear your own heartbeat like a drum in the emptiness. No wind, no shouts. Even your breath feels loud, as though the cold air doesn't want to be disturbed. This isn't just quiet, it's the kind of silence that presses on you, making you afraid to move in case you break it. You look around and see men frozen mid-motion, their eyes wide but their bodies still. They're not injured, they're listening. All of you are. It's instinct, the same way animals go still after lightning. You know the avalanche could return. A second slide can follow the first, and sometimes it's worse. Historians are still debating whether soldiers feared the enemy more than they feared the snow. Here, in this moment, the question has an easy answer. The air is heavy with powder, and it stings the back of your throat when you breathe. It tastes like the inside of a glacier, metallic, old, faintly bitter. You watch the powder drift down in slow motion, tiny flakes settling into the folds of your coat. It's beautiful in a way if you ignore the fact that it just buried men you knew. The snow softens every shape, smoothing the world into something deceptively peaceful. Somewhere to your right, a man lifts his shovel, pauses, and then sets it back down. The sound it makes is too sharp, like breaking glass in a cathedral. You catch his eye and he shakes his head, not speaking. The cold makes every movement feel deliberate, like the air itself is thicker now. You can almost imagine it freezing solid around you, keeping you trapped in this moment forever. Your boots crunch when you step forward, and the sound is jarring against the stillness. It echoes strangely, bouncing off the ridges like a whisper passed between ghosts. You take another step, slower this time, almost apologizing to the snow with your careful pace. The trench, half filled with white, looks like it's been abandoned for years instead of minutes. It's hard to tell where the battle lines were now. Everything belongs to the mountain again. The first voice comes like a crack in glass. A soldier at the far end calls out a name, his voice low but urgent. There's no answer. Others join in, scattered calls across the slope, and the silence begins to fracture. It's not loud, not yet, but it's enough to remind you that you're not alone in this frozen pause. Somewhere under your boots, the mountain still holds men who haven't taken their last breath. And then, almost without warning, the wind returns. It snakes down the slope in a single, sharp gust, carrying with it the smell of pine and the faint tang of smoke from some unseen fire. The silence breaks completely now. Shovels scrape, boots stomp, voices call louder. But for those few minutes in between, it was as if time itself had stopped, leaving you to wonder if maybe the mountain wanted you to hear what silence really sounds like. Even as you work, digging beside men whose faces are set like stone, the memory of that silence lingers. You know that when you lie down tonight, you'll hear it again in your head, not as absence, but as something alive, pressing in from every side. And you'll remember how, for a moment, the air itself seemed frozen in place. The first man they find is half buried, his shoulder and helmet breaking the smooth surface of the snow. A gloved hand brushes away the powder from his face, and it's like looking at someone who just stopped to rest. His eyes are closed, his mouth relaxed, not twisted in pain or fear. It's unsettling in a way you can't quite name. This isn't what you've been told death in war looks like. Here it's quiet, almost gentle, as if the avalanche had simply pressed pause on his life. More shapes appear as the digging goes on. A boot sticking out at an odd angle, the curve of a rifle stock, the edge of a leather belt. Every find slows the work. Men stop shoveling for a moment, staring at what they've uncovered, as if expecting the figure to open his eyes and stand up. You remember hearing a medic say once that the cold preserves more than flesh. It preserves moments. These soldiers are frozen mid-step, caught between one breath and the next, and the mountain has been holding them like this for hours, or maybe for 100 years. One man's hand still grips his rifle, the barrel crusted with ice, the strap tight across his chest. Another has a scarf wrapped around his neck, the ends frozen in mid-flutter, as though the wind that lifted them never settled. The details are so intact it feels wrong to call them bodies. They are people, just stopped. The mountain doesn't strip them of their identity. It freezes them in it, and that's what makes it so haunting. A soldier next to you mutters that it's like walking through a wax museum where the statues can breathe if they want to. You glance at him, half expecting him to take it back, but he doesn't. The image fits too well. These men aren't posed for heroism or drama. They're just exactly as they were in their last seconds. Eyes on the slope ahead, hands on their weapons, boots mid-stride. Historians are still debating whether the conditions in these mountains were harsher than the trenches below. But standing here, you know the truth doesn't need debating. You help pull one figure free, and the weight is shocking, heavier than you'd expect. The ice locked into every layer of clothing, every crease of skin. His coat is stiff, his hair brittle, but his face could be sleeping. You find yourself looking away, not because it's gruesome, but because it's too human. It feels like an invasion to see someone in this perfect, final stillness. You wonder if someone will see you like this one day, preserved and unchanging, your last moment mistaken for peace. By late afternoon, the trench is lined with these figures, laid out on the snow like men waiting for orders. Their uniforms vary, some patched and worn, others surprisingly neat. A few still have packs strapped to their backs, as if the avalanche caught them mid-march. You notice details: a button hanging by a thread, the corner of a photograph poking from a breast pocket, a strip of fabric mended with a careful stitch. Little pieces of life, sealed in frost. The officer orders them covered for the night, and blankets are draped over the frozen forms. But you know the cold doesn't care about blankets. The mountain will keep them as it has, without decay, without change. As darkness falls, you glance down the line and it strikes you. In the shadows, they look like they're just standing still, waiting for the signal to move again. That thought follows you back to your dugout. Even as the wind howls outside, you can't shake the image of rifles in frozen hands, boots mid-step, faces calm as sleep. The avalanche didn't just take them, it claimed them, set them aside like pieces on a board it intends to play with later, and you can't help but wonder how many more are still out there, standing quietly under the ice. The war has long since ended when the first rumors begin to ripple through the valleys. Shepherds moving their flocks higher for the summer pasture, talk of odd shapes caught in the glacier above. At first, it's dismissed as nothing more than shadows playing tricks. Ice can twist the light, turn rocks into faces, and faces into rocks. But the details keep piling up. A flash of leather, the curve of a boot toe, a length of dark wood that could only be a rifle stock. You weren't there to see it, but you can imagine the chill that must have run down their spines. One old man tells of leading his sheep along a narrow path when the glacier's edge caught his eye. In the pale sunlight, a figure seemed to stand just beneath the surface, head bowed as if in prayer. He swore he could see the folds of a greatcoat, even the strap across the chest. The next day he returned, and it was gone, buried again by a thin overnight snowfall. The mountain, it seemed, was in no rush to give up its secrets. As the summers grow warmer, more stories surface. Children following the herds begin to dare each other to get closer, to press their hands against the ice and feel the cold bite through their skin. Some swear they've felt the shape of fingers under their palms, rigid and unmoving. Others claim the figures change from year to year, as if the glacier is slowly rearranging them, deciding which to show and which to hide. Historians are still debating whether these sightings were genuine or exaggerated by memory, but locals know what they've seen. It isn't just bodies that emerge, a length of rusted barbed wire, still curled in a snarl, metal buckles that once held a pack in place, fragments of cloth, stiff as bark, their colors long since faded. Every summer thaw pulls something new from the mountain's frozen archive, and every autumn snow seals it away again. It becomes a strange sort of rhythm, the glacier breathing in and out with the seasons, offering glimpses of a buried world. By the late 1950s, the stories have spread far beyond the valleys. Hikers make detours to see if they can spot the shapes for themselves. Some bring cameras, snapping grainy black and white photos of dark forms suspended in the blue-white ice. The images aren't clear, but they don't need to be. A shadow in the right place is enough to keep the legend alive. And the legend is always the same. The mountain keeps who it wants. Shepherds begin to avoid certain routes, not out of fear of avalanches, but because they don't want to look into the glacier anymore. There's something unsettling about locking eyes, or the illusion of eyes, with someone who died long before you were born. Even the sheep seem uneasy, skirting the edges of the meltwater streams without prompting. It's as if they too can sense the weight of what lies beneath. Tourists occasionally laugh at the stories, calling them mountain gossip. But every so often, someone comes back pale-faced, swearing they saw a man's jawline behind the glassy wall, a strap running from shoulder to chest, the faint glint of a belt buckle. They say it with the kind of conviction you can't fake, the kind that sticks to you long after the words fade. And through it all, the glacier waits. Each year, it loosens its grip just a little more, letting a scrap of cloth flutter free or the tip of a boot peek through the melting edge. But never enough to tell the whole story. It is patient, impossibly patient, as if it knows its time will come, when the world will be ready to see exactly what it's been holding on to for so long. It happens slowly, so slowly that at first no one notices. The summer sun lingers longer over the peaks, the glacier shrinks by inches, and thin streams begin to trickle down its edges. The water is clear, almost too clear, carrying the taste of centuries in its melt. And beside those streams, dark shapes begin to appear. A curve of rusted metal catches the light. A strap of leather, hardened and cracked, lies half buried where the ice has just let it go. The war is leaking out into the valley, one artifact at a time. The first helmet they find is more shadow than object. A dull outline in the ice wall, just enough for the mind to finish the picture. When the sun hits it right, you can see the seam along the crown, the faint dent where something struck it. No one dares chip it out. The old ones warn that the glacier doesn't like to be hurried. A few days later, after a warm spell, the helmet is simply there on the rocks, as if the ice had set it down gently for someone to take. Not long after, the meltwater reveals a belt strap, still attached to a square brass buckle. The leather has gone the color of old wood, its edges curled and stiff, but the shape is unmistakable. You imagine the weight of it around a man's waist, the way the buckle would have gleamed when it was new. Now it lies across a stone like an abandoned snake, the glacier's slow surrender to the sun. Historians are still debating whether these finds should be retrieved or left in place, but down in the valley they're treated like offerings, gifts from the mountain that no one asked for. Some days the meltwater is littered with fragments, buttons, bits of cloth, a length of rusted chain. Other days, nothing. The unpredictability only adds to the strangeness, as if the glacier chooses when to remember and when to forget. The streams themselves seem to whisper as they slide over the rocks, carrying tiny flecks of grit and the faint brown stain of rust. You kneel once to cup the water in your hands, and it's colder than you expect. Cold enough to make your fingers ache instantly. You can't help but think of what or who that water might have passed through before reaching you. Shepherds begin to gather the sturdier pieces, storing them in barns or hanging them from nails in quiet corners. A rusted helmet sits on one shelf, a strap beside it, both coated in a fine layer of dust as if they've been there for decades instead of days. Visitors ask about them, but the shepherds rarely answer directly. They'll gesture toward the glacier and say something like, "It's returning what it doesn't need." On one afternoon, a boy finds a helmet in a shallow pool, the leather liner inside still intact. He picks it up and feels the weight, heavier than he expected. Later, when asked about it, he says the strangest thing, that the leather felt warm, just for a moment, like it had been worn minutes before. No one knows what to make of that, and maybe that's for the best. Over time, the collection grows, mismatched, weathered, but undeniably human. The pieces don't tell a full story on their own, but together they whisper of lives interrupted, of men caught mid-march and mid-breath. Each item feels like a clue, but the puzzle is too big for anyone to solve. And so they are left as they are. Rusted helmets, leather straps, a quiet reminder that the glacier keeps its own clock and its own secrets. At night, when the air cools and the streams slow to a trickle, the artifacts seem almost to fade back into the mountain's shadow. You get the sense that if you turned away for long enough, they might disappear completely, taken back into the ice until the next thaw or the next century. By midsummer, the glacier's edge is bare enough that even children wander up from the valley to see it. They come in small groups, all noise and bravado, until the ice looms above them. The surface is streaked with blue veins, and here and there, something darker presses against it, shapes just beneath the glassy skin. A hand, pale and stiff, fingers curled slightly as if holding something invisible. The braver ones press their palms to the ice, feeling the cold shoot straight through to their bones. The others hang back, pretending not to care. It becomes a game, whispered about in the village but never encouraged by the elders. Touch the hand and count to 10, the rule goes. Few make it past 5. The cold isn't just cold. It feels alive, like it's moving into you. One boy swears the fingers shifted under his touch, just barely, as if responding. The others laugh nervously, but no one asks him to prove it. In a place like this, you don't joke about what's under the ice. On some afternoons, the glacier offers more than just a hand. A face might appear in the right light, half obscured by frost. The nose flattened, the lips pale, the eyes closed but unmistakably human. The children stare, torn between horror and fascination, and sometimes one will lean so close their breath clouds the surface. When the wind blows and clears the frost away, it feels like looking into a window that opens onto another century. Historians are still debating whether the warmth of a human touch accelerates the melting, but the villagers don't need a scientist to tell them that contact changes things. The older kids invent dares that grow riskier. Knock on the ice 3 times, whisper your name to the face, leave a coin where the meltwater runs. These rituals mean nothing to outsiders, but in the valley, they're performed with a strange mix of fear and respect. No one talks about the boy who left a button and found it gone the next day, or the girl who said she heard someone tapping back from inside the ice. Even the youngest learned quickly that the glacier doesn't give up its dead easily. The hand they saw in July might be gone by August, swallowed again by a fresh freeze or hidden behind a curtain of snow. The unpredictability makes every visit feel like a gamble. Will you see something today, or will the mountain decide it has shown enough? The children, of course, are drawn to that uncertainty, like moths to a flame. Parents scold, but the warnings are half-hearted. Everyone remembers being young here, daring each other to get just a little closer, to touch the untouchable. And everyone remembers the first time they realized the ice was more than just frozen water, that it was a wall between the living and the ones the mountain kept. The realization doesn't come all at once. It seeps in like cold through wool. By summer's end, the children know the shapes by heart. The curve of the hand, the slope of a shoulder, the faint outline of a strap. They talk about them as if they were neighbors, giving them nicknames only they understand. And yet, when winter comes and buries everything under fresh snow, it's as if those neighbors vanish entirely. No one can prove they were ever there, except in the shared memory of a dare, a touch, and the bone-deep cold that comes with it. It starts with the shepherds, their voices low over evening fires, telling of the shapes they've seen in the glacier. Not bodies exactly, not lying down as the dead should, but standing, upright, motionless. Faces turned toward the valley as if keeping watch. The stories grow in the telling. A soldier frozen mid-step, one boot forward, rifle slung casually across his shoulder, another with his hands resting on the barrel, chin lifted like he's still waiting for orders. The phrase comes naturally, men who stand guard for eternity. As the years pass, the legend spreads beyond the valleys. Hikers and climbers arrive, curious to see the eternal sentinels for themselves. Some go home claiming they saw them, their voices tinged with awe or unease. Others see nothing but ice and shadow. Yet even they speak of a strange feeling, as if the mountain's gaze followed them back down the trail. Historians are still debating whether these reports are proof of preservation or just tricks of light. In the villages, though, there's no debate. They know what's up there. The descriptions vary, but the essence is the same. The soldiers aren't frozen in fear or agony. They're calm, collected, as if they knew their watch would be longer than any war. Their uniforms may be tattered, their gear rusted, but their posture is unyielding. Some say it's the discipline drilled into them in life. Others whisper it's the glacier itself, holding them in place like chess pieces it refuses to move. One autumn, a shepherd swears he saw two figures side by side, rifles angled the same way, eyes fixed on the same point in the distance. When he returned in the spring, they were gone, replaced perhaps by new sentinels revealed in the shifting ice. The thought unsettles him, that the guard might change, but the watch never ends. It suggests something active, a kind of rotation, as if the mountain keeps its own roster. Children in the valley take the stories as gospel. They imagine the soldiers in whispered games, inventing ranks and names for them, pretending to take orders from voices only they can hear. The adults don't discourage it. Better for the young to think of the figures as protectors than to dwell on the truth. These were men who never made it home. You can tell, though, by the way the elders glance toward the peaks at dusk, that they don't see protection. They see a reminder. By the time winter clamps down again, the sentinels vanish under new snow, their watch hidden but never ended. The ice thickens. The wind erases every sign that they were ever there. Yet the stories persist, retold in kitchens, at tavern tables, on quiet trails. They're told as warnings, as omens, as proof that the mountain doesn't simply kill, it keeps. And those it keeps standing. Every so often, a hiker will come back with a new detail. A glint of metal where the sun hit a buckle, the faint shape of a strap against a shoulder. They describe the soldiers like statues in a gallery, untouched by time, waiting for the next shift change that never comes. And whether you believe the stories or not, you can't shake the feeling that somewhere, just out of sight, someone is still up there, holding the line. The summer of that year feels wrong from the very start. The snow melts too quickly on the lower slopes. Streams swell earlier than anyone remembers, and the high pastures turn green weeks ahead of schedule. The shepherds shake their heads, muttering that the mountain is impatient. You climb higher one morning, following the sound of meltwater rushing down the gullies. And when you reach the glacier's edge, you see it, a dark oval against the pale blue wall. At first you think it's just a shadow. Then the light shifts and it becomes a face. It's not the kind of face you expect from a frozen body. The skin, pale and wax smooth, lies unbroken beneath a thin layer of ice. The eyes are closed, lashes faint but visible, the lips resting in a faint curve that could almost be a half smile. You stand there, forgetting to breathe, your mind scrambling to accept what your eyes are telling you. This isn't a relic or a rumor or a trick of the light. This is a man, a soldier, staring out from a century ago, asleep in the mountain's keeping. A trickle of water runs past his temple, catching the sunlight like a silver thread. It's so small, so gentle, that you almost laugh at the idea that it's been working for years to bring this moment to you. Historians are still debating whether the great thaws of recent decades are accidents of weather or signs of something permanent. But standing here, you can't shake the feeling that the mountain chose this day, this summer, to let him be seen. Word spreads faster than the meltwater. Within days, a handful of hikers and locals gather at the site, keeping a respectful distance. No one talks loudly as though the ice might shatter at the wrong word. A man with a camera crouches, snapping shots from every angle, muttering about the clarity of the preservation. A woman crosses herself, her eyes fixed on the soldier's mouth, as if waiting for it to move. You notice the rifle strap frozen across his chest, the faint frost clinging to his collar. The air here feels heavier than anywhere else on the slope. It's not just the altitude. It's the presence of something caught between life and death. A shepherd you recognize leans over to you and says, "He's dreaming. Look at his face. He's not gone, not yet." You want to dismiss it, but the longer you stare, the harder it is to believe you're looking at someone entirely lost to time. Every detail is a contradiction. The perfect preservation, yet the sense of immense age. The stillness, yet the suggestion of motion paused. It's easy to see why the old story spoke of sentinels. Men still standing guard, eyes closed, waiting for their turn to wake. You catch yourself wondering what he last saw before the avalanche took him. Was it the ridge above, heavy with snow? A flash of movement from the enemy line? Or did he simply close his eyes against the wind and never open them again? By evening, the crowd begins to thin, but you remain watching the light fade from the ice. The face grows dim, shadowed in the glacier's blue, and soon it's almost invisible again. But you know it's there, resting, hidden until the next burst of sunlight. The mountain has given you a glimpse, and just as quickly, it has taken it back. As you turn to leave, the sound of the meltwater follows you down the trail. It feels like a whisper, like the glacier is telling you this is only the beginning. The face is just the first of many truths it plans to reveal, piece by frozen piece, as the summers grow warmer and the patience of the ice runs out. 2 days later, a small group of climbers arrives, roped together, their crampons biting into the ice with each step. Word of the discovery has spread far beyond the valley now, and these are not casual hikers. They've come with ice axes, coils of rope, and the kind of cautious energy you see in people who know the mountain can turn on them at any second. When they reach the site, they stop short. The soldier's face is still there, framed in the clear ice, and the air around him seems to hold them in place. One of them crouches low, his gloved hand resting lightly on the glacier's surface. He doesn't touch the ice over the face, not yet. He just studies it, eyes narrowing as if trying to spot the trick. But there is no trick. The detail is too sharp. The creases in the coat's collar, the curve of the ear beneath the cap, the faint indentation at the corner of the mouth. It's like he's waiting, one of them says, the words trailing off into the cold air. Another climber leans closer, his breath fogging the surface. The moisture freezes instantly, leaving a thin frost across a part of the soldier's cheek. They all watch as the frost slowly clears again under the steady warmth of the sun. It feels absurd. The man has been here for more than 100 years, but they find themselves speaking in whispers, afraid to wake him. Historians are still debating whether the mountain's preservation is a natural fluke or the perfect alignment of altitude, temperature, and ice density. Standing here, though, it feels like something else entirely. One of the climbers unclips a small camera from his harness, kneels down, and begins to take slow, deliberate shots from every angle. The shutter clicks are unnervingly loud in the stillness. The photos will show every detail, he says, for documentation. But you can tell he's really taking them because he's afraid he won't believe his own memory later. Another climber takes out a notebook and sketches the outline, hands moving quickly, as if racing against the possibility that the ice might cloud over again without warning. They discuss whether to attempt any excavation, but the decision is quick. No. The mountain has allowed them to see this much. Pushing further might feel like prying open a locked door without permission. Instead, they settle into a strange vigil, sitting on their packs in a semicircle around the figure, like they've stumbled into a shrine. No one speaks for long stretches of time. The only sound is the drip of meltwater falling from the ledges above, each drop echoing faintly in the still air. At one point, a climber shifts his weight and accidentally taps the ice wall with his axe. The sound is sharp and metallic, almost like a bell. For a moment, everyone freezes, staring at the soldier's face. Nothing changes, of course, but the tension is real. The kind of superstitious pause born from old stories. You remember the phrase you first heard in the trench all those years ago? The mountain keeps who it wants. Here you realize the keeping is deliberate. As the sun dips lower, the blue in the ice deepens, and shadows crawl up the glacier's face. The soldier's features become softer, less distinct, until only the suggestion of a face remains. The climbers exchange glances, silently agreeing it's time to go. They clip back into the rope, double-check their gear, and begin the careful descent, leaving no sign they were ever there. But you can tell, by the way, they keep glancing over their shoulders, that the image will follow them down the mountain and into their dreams. You remain for a moment after they're gone, watching the last light fade. The air is cold enough now to make your breath sting in your nose. The soldier is barely visible in the ice, hidden once more, but you know he's there. The mountain's quiet proof that some watches never end. And as you turn to follow the climber's path down, you realize you're already wondering what the glacier will show you next. It only takes a week for the story to break beyond the mountain towns. A hiker posts a photo online, grainy, bluish, but unmistakable. And suddenly journalists are hauling camera gear up the same trail where shepherds once led their flocks. By mid-morning, the glacier's edge looks like a film set. Tripods stand crooked in the snow, cables snake between backpacks, and reporters in bright jackets cluster in groups, rehearsing lines into the wind. You stand to one side watching the scene unfold, and it's hard not to feel like the soldier has been turned into a spectacle. A man with a microphone speaks directly to the camera, his breath steaming. "Here, in the Italian Alps, the past has literally returned to us," he says with a practiced smile. Behind him, the soldier's face floats in the ice, serene and unchanging, oblivious to the commotion. The phrase "return from the past" catches on quickly. By lunchtime, it's printed on every clipboard, muttered by every producer. It's easier to market than never left. Historians are still debating whether these rediscoveries are acts of return or simple persistence. Some journalists treat the site like sacred ground, keeping their voices low and their questions thoughtful. Others crowd in close, their camera lenses almost touching the ice. One leans so far forward that his jacket brushes the surface, leaving a damp patch that immediately freezes over. The soldier's cheek vanishes under a thin veil of frost, and a frustrated photographer mutters under his breath. It's strange. A century of ice hasn't harmed him, but a careless elbow can hide him from view in seconds. They ask the usual questions. Who was he? How did he die? Will he be removed? No one has answers yet. An older guide shrugs when a reporter presses for details. "He belongs to the mountain," she says simply, before walking away. You can tell she's been answering that question her whole life, even if the face in the ice is new. Not all the coverage feels respectful. A young journalist suggests staging a photo with someone saluting the frozen soldier. The climbers who first found him refuse outright, their voices sharp. "He's not a prop," one says. The refusal creates a quiet ripple of tension through the group. It's a reminder that this is more than a curiosity. It's a man's final resting place, even if it looks like he's just sleeping. As the sun climbs higher, the ice around the soldier's face thins, sharpening every line and shadow. The cameras click faster now, as if everyone senses they're in a race against the day's warmth. Meltwater runs in steady rivulets down the slope, sparkling in the light. A reporter dips his hand in, shivering at the cold, and jokes for the camera about shaking hands with history. The laugh sounds hollow in the thin air. By late afternoon, the journalists begin their descent, lugging their gear down the ridge. They've gotten what they came for. Footage, quotes, a headline that will pull clicks. The glacier, meanwhile, remains as it was, quiet and unbothered, the soldier's face still watching the valley with eyes that never open. You realize that tomorrow or next week, new people will come, and the mountain will decide how much of its secret they're allowed to see. As you turn to leave, you look back one last time. The soldier's features have softened in the dimming light, almost disappearing into the ice. It feels like he's withdrawing, pulling himself back into the century where he belongs. You can't help but wonder if the mountain is already tired of showing him to us. By the time the last of the reporters pack up and head down the trail, the site feels strangely empty. The echo of voices fades, leaving only the drip of meltwater and the occasional crack of shifting ice. The soldier's face is still there, softened by the late light, and for the first time all day, no one is jostling for a better angle. You step closer, careful not to touch the ice, and notice that someone has left a small bundle of alpine flowers at the base of the glacier. Their bright petals look almost defiant against the white. The next morning, more offerings appear: a tarnished button, a cigarette in its paper sleeve, a scrap of cloth, blue and frayed, pinned under a small stone. None of them are labeled, and no one claims them. People come in pairs or alone, moving quietly as if drawn here by something they can't quite name. They stand for a while, looking into the ice, then leave without a word. It's not a crowd, not anymore, just a slow procession of strangers who've decided this soldier deserves their time. One man wearing a heavy wool coat despite the warm day removes his cap and stands with his head bowed. He stays like that for a long time, long enough that you start to feel the cold creeping into your own feet. When he finally moves, he takes something from his pocket, a small photograph in a cracked leather frame, and tucks it into a crevice near the base. You don't see the picture, but you know it won't last. The meltwater will take it eventually, the mountain adding it to whatever collection it keeps hidden inside. The offerings begin to pile up in small, uneven clusters: a brass shell casing, a hand-carved wooden cross, coins from countries far from this range of peaks. Some visitors stay for only a minute, others for an hour, but all seem to leave lighter than when they arrived, as if some burden has been shared with the man in the ice. Historians are still debating whether this site should be formally recognized, but here on the glacier, the recognition is already happening in silence. You notice how the air feels different here. Still cold, but softer, almost gentle compared to the biting winds higher up. The sound of the meltwater is steady, like breathing. You imagine the soldier hearing it too, year after year, as the world changes beyond his frozen wall. It's not hard to picture him as a kind of guardian, holding his post while generations come and go. By late afternoon, the flowers have begun to wilt, their stems drooping toward the ice. The cigarette is gone, likely taken by the wind, and the photograph's frame is damp and curling. The glacier shows no sign of noticing, yet it holds the scene together: the face, the gifts, the quiet air that seems to hum with something unspoken. As the sun dips behind the peaks, shadows stretch long across the slope. The visitors leave in twos and threes, their voices low, footsteps muffled in the soft snow. Soon it's just you, the soldier, and the sound of water sliding into the valley. The ice has claimed him for more than a century, but for these few days, it's as if the mountain has allowed him to receive company. When you finally turn to go, you feel the same pull everyone else does, the urge to look back one more time, and when you do, the soldier's face is almost gone in the twilight, blurred by the deepening blue of the glacier. The shrine will be here tomorrow, but it will never be exactly the same again. The first thaw of August brings more than flowers and coins to the glacier's edge. One morning, a pair of hikers return to the village wide-eyed, speaking over each other about what they've seen higher up the slope. It isn't just the lone soldier anymore. In a hollow of the ice, where the meltwater pools before spilling down the rocks, two more figures have appeared. One half-curled, the other lying on his side as if mid-conversation. Beside them, Scattered in the frost are objects that have no business surviving a century. The most striking is a small envelope. Its paper yellowed but still sealed, the flap held shut by a wax stamp cracked only at the edges. You can make out faint writing, careful script in a language you don't recognize. It sits on the ice like it was set down just minutes ago. No one dares touch it. The cold seems to wrap around it protectively, as if the letter still belongs to the man who carried it. Historians are still debating whether opening such relics robs them of their meaning or reveals truths that need to be known. Near the letter lies a photograph. The corners curled, the image faded but not gone. A woman stares out from it, her hair pinned neatly, a faint smile caught in that old-fashioned way portraits have. The frost has formed delicate crystals along the edge of her face, as though the mountain itself decided to frame her. You imagine the soldier pulling it from his coat on lonely nights, letting his eyes rest on her instead of the endless white. Then there's the chest piece. It's a knight carved from wood so smooth it still reflects light in the shallow sun. How it ended up here is anyone's guess. Maybe the soldiers played in the dugouts during long nights, the board balanced on an ammo crate. Maybe this piece was carried as a talisman, its strange horse-headed shape a reminder of home or of strategy in a place where survival was the only real game. Either way, it lies in the snow now, as though waiting for the next move. Other items emerge as the day warms. A metal tin dented on one side, the lid still holding, a leather strap with a buckle that catches the light, a set of buttons scattered like breadcrumbs. Each object seems to carry its own shadow, the echo of the hand that once held it. People gather, their voices low, circling the find as though standing at the edge of a camp from another world. By evening, someone has placed the envelope, the photo and the chest piece together on a flat stone near the glacier. No one says who did it, but the arrangement feels deliberate, like an offering to the men in the ice. The wind is gentle, the meltwater steady, and for a few minutes it feels like the entire mountain is listening. When the sun dips behind the ridge, the temperature drops fast. The objects seem to pull closer to the glacier, shadows stretching toward the ice as if they know where they belong. You take one last look before heading down the trail. The soldiers in the hollow are already fading back into the blue, their possessions catching the last light of the day. You know by morning some of it may be gone, either claimed by the mountain or buried again until another summer decides to set them free. The next day, the envelope is gone from the flat stone. For a moment, you think the mountain has taken it back, but then you see a small group gathered a few paces from the glacier, their heads bent close. One of them, a local guide, is holding the letter carefully in both hands, the way someone might hold a bird that could break at any moment. The seal has split, not from force, but from the heat of the day before. The flap lifts gently, as if the paper has finally decided to speak. Inside, the ink is faded but still readable, the handwriting looping in the precise style of an era when every word mattered. The first line catches your eye. To my little boy. The room, if you can call this patch of ice and stone a room, goes utterly still. No one interrupts as the guide begins to read aloud, his voice quiet but steady. The soldier writes of the cold, of missing home, of promising to return before the leaves fall. He tells his son to be kind to his mother, to feed the dog, to keep practicing his numbers. There is no hint that he knows he will never see them again. The paper trembles slightly in the wind, and the guide pauses to shield it. Historians are still debating whether such letters should remain unopened as historical artifacts or be shared so their voices can live again. Here the debate feels irrelevant. The man's voice is alive in the air now, carried on breath and ice and the murmur of meltwater. You can almost picture him hunched over a crate in some snow-dug shelter, fingers stiff with cold as he presses each word onto the page. When the guide finishes, no one speaks for a long moment. The glacier groans faintly somewhere deep within, a low sound that might be nothing more than shifting ice, but it feels like a response. The letter is placed back in its envelope, and for lack of a better plan, someone tucks it into a tin to keep it dry. No one claims ownership. It doesn't belong to any of them. Not really. Whispers begin almost immediately. Should the letter be sent to the soldiers' descendants if they can be found? Or should it stay here with the man who wrote it, resting beside him in the cold? A journalist from the day before argues that it should go to a museum where it can be preserved properly. The locals push back. The mountain has preserved it better than any archive could for 100 years. The argument never finds an answer. As the crowd drifts away, you stay behind, your eyes lingering on the tin with the envelope inside. It sits on a flat rock at the glacier's base, the photo of the woman and the chess piece nearby, as if they belong together. The sun hits them just right for a few seconds, making the tin gleam. And you think, absurdly, that if the man could see this, strangers gathered to listen to his words a century later, he might smile the same small, calm smile frozen into the ice. By the time you start back down the trail, the shadows are long, and the tin is just a dark shape against the snow. Tomorrow it might still be there, or the mountain might decide it's been shared long enough. Either way, the boy the letter was meant for is long gone, but for a few minutes today, he lived again, here in the quiet shadow of the glacier, among people who never knew his name, but felt his absence all the same. By the third day, the site no longer feels like a quiet shrine. The trickle of visitors has grown into a steady flow. Hikers, journalists, curious locals, and now people claiming to be distant relatives of soldiers who fought here. They stand near the glacier, eyes darting between the letter in its tin, the photograph, and the chess piece, as though each object might hold the proof they need. Their voices stay low at first, but soon you can hear the tension in their words. Someone asks outright, "If that's my great-grandfather, shouldn't I take his things home?" Others disagree immediately. A history professor from Milan, wrapped in a red scarf that flaps in the alpine wind, argues that removing these artifacts strips them of their context. "Here they speak," she says, pointing toward the glacier. "In a glass case, they are silent." Her voice has the conviction of someone used to winning arguments. But the locals aren't convinced. They've lived with the mountain's slow generosity for generations, and the idea of strangers walking away with its offerings feels like a violation. The debate spreads along the trail, carried in bursts between groups. Some speak of dignity. How could you leave a soldier's last letter in the cold instead of delivering it to his family? Others speak of preservation. How could you take it from the very ice that kept it whole for a century? Historians are still debating the ethics of artifact recovery in war zones, but here the lines are drawn in real time, and the air is thick with something more than just cold. At the glacier's base, a man in his 40s stands with his hands jammed in his coat pockets, staring hard at the photograph of the woman. "She looks like my grandmother," he says finally, not to anyone in particular. His voice trembles just enough for the nearest guide to glance at him, weighing whether to ask for proof. But proof is hard to find up here, where names and faces blur with time. The man doesn't press the claim. He just keeps looking until the wind forces him to turn away. Meanwhile, a journalist snaps photos of the debate itself, crouching low to catch the tin, the flowers, the photo, and the faces of those arguing nearby. It's clear this has become more than a story about ice and preservation. It's about ownership, memory, and the strange pull of objects that survived when their owners did not. One of the climbers who first found the soldier mutters under his breath, "The mountain doesn't care who wins this argument." He's right, of course. As the sun dips, the conversation loses its heat. People begin to drift away, but the question remains hanging in the air, stubborn as the cold. Who do these things belong to? The soldier, his family, the public, or the mountain, which has kept them longer than anyone else ever could? You stand there, staring at the tin, the photograph, the chess piece, and you realize there is no answer that will satisfy everyone. By the time you leave, the site is quiet again, the wind smoothing over the footprints in the snow. The relics remain where they've been placed, untouched for now. But you know this won't be the last time the question rises. The mountain may not care who claims its treasures, but the people who climb to see them, they care deeply, and they'll carry the argument back down the valley into homes, cafes, and newsrooms until it finds its way into history books or courtrooms. That evening, when the crowds thin and the sun begins to lower behind the ridge, you return to the glacier. The air is sharper now, and the light glances off the ice in long golden streaks. The relics are still there, the tin holding the letter, the photograph of the woman, the smooth wooden knight from the chess set. But in the fading light, they don't look like museum pieces. They look like voices. You can almost hear them if you let yourself be still long enough. The letter whispers in a father's voice, gentle and steady, telling his son to mind his mother, to feed the dog, to keep practicing his numbers. The photo hums softly with the memory of a woman waiting by a window, her hair pinned just so, her eyes scanning the horizon for a figure that never came home. The chess piece speaks in quieter tones. Not of war, but of moments stolen between danger, of strategies played out under candlelight. A reminder that even in the worst places, the mind seeks play. You kneel down beside them, your gloved hand brushing snow away from the stone they rest on. The wind moves around you in slow curls, almost careful not to disturb the arrangement. You think of the decades these objects spent in perfect darkness, sealed away in the glacier's blue chambers, waiting for a thaw that might never come. Historians are still debating whether the mountain gives these things up by chance or by some pattern we can't see. Standing here, you feel certain it's the latter. Each item seems to resist the idea of being claimed or owned. They feel less like possessions and more like messengers, fragments carrying the weight of lives interrupted. You imagine them sinking back into the ice one day, not out of spite, but because their message has been heard and it's time to rest again. The thought is both comforting and unsettling, like closing a book you know you'll never open again. The glacier groans softly somewhere deep inside, the sound like a long sigh. It echoes off the surrounding rock faces, a reminder that the mountain has been here before any of us and will be here long after. You can't help but feel that the soldiers, the relics, and the ice itself are all part of the same story. One written so slowly that most people will never notice it's still being told. You stand there until the cold seeps through your boots, your breath clouding thick in the dim light. As you turn to leave, you glance back one last time. The letter, the photo, the chess piece, they seem to watch you go, silent but present. You feel their absence the moment the glacier slips out of sight, as though you've left a conversation unfinished. Walking down the trail, the valley below spread out in the last light of day. You realize something. The mountain may keep who it wants, but sometimes it lets the rest of us listen. And these small, stubborn whispers are proof that the past doesn't need permission to speak. The scientists arrive without the noise of journalists or the reverence of locals. They move with precision, their boots leaving neat lines in the snow, their gear packed in metal cases that clink softly as they set them down. The glacier doesn't seem to care about them any more than it has about anyone else. But the air feels different, more clinical, less like a shrine and more like a lab. They've come for the soldiers not as mourners, but as investigators, and the first thing they do is mark the ice with orange flags, a grid laid over a century of stillness. They start with the soldier whose face first appeared that warm summer. The lead forensic expert, a woman with sunburned cheeks and mirrored goggles, kneels at the glacier's base and runs her gloved hand along the ice. She doesn't speak for a long time, just studies the curves and shadows, the way the sunlight refracts through layers of frost. Then she signals to her team, and the careful cutting begins. The sound is sharp, steady, the whine of specialized saws slicing through time itself. Chunks of ice are removed in measured slabs, each one cradled in insulated containers as though it were a rare artifact. In a way, it is. These aren't just blocks of frozen water, they're pieces of the soldier's final moment, preserved in texture and clarity. You watch the steam rise as the saws heat slightly, and for a moment, it feels like the glacier is exhaling, reluctantly but with intent. Historians are still debating whether such invasive work risks damaging what the ice has kept so perfectly. The soldier's coat emerges slowly, the fabric a dull, frost-bitten gray, but astonishingly intact. The scientists murmur to each other in quick, clipped sentences, noting the stitching, the insignia still faintly visible on the sleeve. One of them uses a soft brush to sweep away frost from the soldier's hand. The fingers are curled loosely, the skin pale and smooth under the thin glaze of ice. Someone whispers, "Still warm if you close your eyes," and earns a sharp look from the lead investigator. The glacier groans faintly, or maybe it's just the wind shifting over the ridges. But it's enough to make a few people glance up toward the slopes. The cutting continues, each pass of the saw measured so that nothing moves too fast. This isn't excavation so much as negotiation. The mountain is giving them space for now, and they seem to know it. The soldier's form begins to separate from the wall, his profile emerging like a photograph developing in slow motion. Beside him, other shapes wait, outlines of men still pressed into the glacier's blue depths. The scientists mark these too, but they won't touch them yet. One at a time, the lead says. It's part caution, part respect. The ice has its own pace, and forcing it feels like asking for trouble. You remember how the locals warned about rushing the mountain's will. Standing here, it's hard not to believe them. By late afternoon, the soldier is free enough that the team can begin wrapping the exposed sections in protective cloth, layering them with insulation. They're not taking him yet. Transport will happen later, carefully with a plan for every step down the mountain. For now, they've opened a doorway in the ice and stepped halfway through, and the cold air spilling out feels older than anything you've ever breathed. As the team packs their tools, the soldier remains, half in the glacier, half out, like someone caught between worlds. You wonder if he feels lighter now, or if he even notices the difference. The mountain gives no hint either way, just the steady drip of meltwater pulling at your feet. And in that sound, you think you hear the same message it's been repeating all along. Nothing comes out before it's time. The soldier's body is transported down the mountain at first light, swaddled in layers of insulation, the ice around him still intact. The forensic team moves slowly, their path guarded by both guides and soldiers from the modern army, as if this man from the past needs an escort through the present. By afternoon, he's in a temperature-controlled lab in the nearest city, lying beneath bright lights instead of the pale glow of the glacier. The hum of the refrigeration units replaces the wind's whistle, and the air smells of antiseptic instead of pine and snow. The scientists work in hushed concentration, careful not to let the cold slip too far from his body. Samples are taken. A strand of hair frozen into his cap, tissue preserved so well it looks like it could still feel the touch of a scalpel. Each is sealed in sterile vials, labeled with precise handwriting, and carried to the adjoining genetics lab. Here, the past meets the present in earnest. The soldier's identity no longer a frozen mystery, but a puzzle of nucleotides waiting to be read. The sequencing takes days, the machines whirring through their endless cycles while the researchers take shifts. You hear them talk about mitochondrial markers and regional genetic profiles, the technical language oddly detached from the intimacy of what they're doing. Somewhere in those strings of code, there's a connection, a living thread that ties this man to someone breathing in the world right now. Historians are still debating whether such matches bring closure or reopen wounds, but the scientists focus on the data, not the philosophy. One evening, the results come in. The lead geneticist, a tall man with tired eyes, steps away from the monitor and exhales slowly. They've found a match, a distant relative living just 2 valleys over, a farmer who's never left the shadow of these mountains. The news spreads quickly through the team, and soon the story is back in the village, where the farmer hears it from a neighbor before the officials arrive. He listens without much expression, as if the idea hasn't settled in yet. When they bring him to the lab the next day, he stands beside the soldier for a long time. There's no tearful recognition. 100 years erases the kind of memory that makes faces familiar. But there's a weight in his posture, a quiet acceptance that the man before him is blood. He rests a hand on the insulated wrapping, not on the soldier's skin, and says something under his breath that no one else catches. It's a moment too personal to interrupt. Later, the farmer tells the press he's proud to bring his ancestor home, but you notice he doesn't rush the process. He agrees to a ceremonial burial, but insists it happen on the mountain, close to where the soldier fell. That's where he's been all this time, he says simply. His words carry the kind of finality that makes the scientists pause, as if they too understand that the glacier's claim on the soldier isn't entirely broken. In the quiet after he leaves, the lab feels colder, the hum of the machines louder. The soldier's DNA has bridged a century, collapsing the distance between now and then in a way no artifact could. But the match also underlines something the mountains seem to know all along. Time may change everything, yet the threads it weaves can still be traced if you're willing to follow them into the ice. Once the soldier's identity is confirmed, the scientists turn their attention to what his body can tell them about life and death on the high mountain front. Under the lab's bright lights, the fabric of his coat is carefully lifted away in sections, revealing the layers beneath. Wool undershirts, thick trousers lined with coarse fabric, socks worn thin at the heels. Each layer is documented, photographed, then sealed for preservation. The smell that escapes is faint, a mix of old wool, earth, and something metallic. The scent of a century locked away. In his pockets, they find crumbs so small they could pass for grit. Yet the chemical tests confirm they are remnants of hardtack, the dense rock-like bread that soldiers carried for weeks. Alongside it, a twist of paper holds what remains of dried meat, still faintly aromatic when warmed in a sealed chamber. The discovery sparks quiet conversation among the researchers, not about the menu, but about the fact that the rations are incomplete. Was he on patrol when the avalanche hit? Did he share his food with someone else before he died? Historians are still debating how supply shortages shape the morale of troops in extreme conditions. Microscopic analysis of his clothing reveals something less romantic. The bodies of lice, frozen in place. Their presence confirms what written accounts have long described, that even in the frozen heights, vermin found a way to survive alongside men. The scientists note that the soldier's skin bears faint marks on the torso and neck, the telltale signs of persistent infestation. It's an oddly humanizing detail, one that collapses the distance between now and then in a way the grand sweep of history rarely can. More unsettling are the injuries. The soldier's fingers and toes show signs of advanced frostbite. The skin mottled, the nails darkened, the tissue beneath damaged beyond repair. The forensic pathologist points to the patterns and explains that these wounds would have caused intense pain in his final days. The idea that he was already weakened when the avalanche struck shifts the narrative slightly. Perhaps he was not caught unaware, but simply unable to escape the snow's path. In the folds of his scarf, the scientists find tiny ice crystals tinted faintly red. Tests show it's blood, likely from chapped lips or a cracked nose in the biting wind. It's such a small thing, yet it carries the weight of the environment. A reminder that here, even the air can wound you. The data confirms what veterans' letters hinted at, that survival wasn't just about avoiding bullets, but about enduring a slow, daily siege from the cold itself. One researcher, a woman with frost-nipped cheeks from her own time in the field, examines the stitching on his boots. They're reinforced with extra strips of leather, clearly a field repair, but the seams are pulling apart. These wouldn't have lasted another week, she says, not to anyone in particular. The comment hangs in the air, another quiet piece of the puzzle of his final days. By evening, the team has filled pages with notes, jars with samples, and memory cards with images. Yet for all their meticulous work, the soldier remains an enigma. The lice, the frostbite, the rations, they speak of hardship, but not of the man himself. The scientists can map his diet, chart his wounds, even trace the parasites that plagued him, but they can't tell you what he was thinking when he took his last step. That, it seems, is something only the mountain knows. The last phase of the examination isn't about clothing or wounds. It's about location. When the soldier's gear is fully cataloged, the cartographers step in, laying out detailed wartime maps beside modern satellite images. The original Army records place his regiment miles from where the glacier revealed him, far below the tree line. Yet here he was, entombed high on a slope no unit was ever officially assigned to. Either the records were wrong, or something happened up here that never made it into the reports. They analyzed the soil caught in the treads of his boots, small clumps preserved in ice, and find mineral traces unique to a ridge 2 kilometers east of where he was found. That ridge wasn't marked as occupied during the winter of 1916, but the evidence says otherwise. A historian leans over the table, frowning, muttering that if soldiers were stationed there, it changes the whole understanding of the front line's reach. Historians are still debating whether these discrepancies are the result of poor record-keeping or deliberate omissions to hide failed maneuvers. The rifle adds another wrinkle. The serial number is intact, and a quick check in an archival database links it to a shipment meant for a different division entirely. Theories start to form in low voices around the room: a reassignment in secret, a patrol gone too far, or even a mix-up in supply lines that left a man stranded far from his unit. None of the possibilities match the clean, linear history printed in textbooks. One of the researchers overlays the soldier's recovery site with a topographic map from the period, tracing possible routes in red pencil. The paths are narrow, dangerous even in good weather. If they came this way, it wasn't by accident, she says, tapping the pencil against the page. That one sentence feels heavier than the stack of maps beside it. It suggests intent, a mission unrecorded, a reason for being in a place the official history swears was empty. The discovery stirs quiet excitement among the younger historians, but unease among the older ones. For them, each new piece of evidence risks unraveling a carefully constructed narrative. One mutters that too much has already been lost to rumor and speculation. The last thing they need is to muddy the record further. But the mountain, in its slow, unbending way, seems to have decided otherwise. It has given up a soldier, and with him, a challenge to the story everyone thought they knew. By the end of the week, revised maps are already circulating among the research team. Dotted lines where there were none before, shaded zones labeled possible positions. These changes won't appear in the public archives for months, maybe years. But in this room, the history of the Alpine front has already shifted. As you step outside into the fading light, the peaks glow in the last gold of the day. Somewhere up there, still locked in the ice, are other soldiers with their own secrets. Secrets that could redraw the map again. You realize that every time the glacier releases another body, it might also rewrite another chapter. And the mountain, patient as ever, will decide the pace. The day of the repatriation begins before sunrise. The valley still wrapped in a pale mist. From the village square, a small procession forms. Soldiers in crisp dress uniforms, local officials in dark coats, and a scattering of townspeople clutching flowers. At the center is a black transport vehicle, its rear doors open to reveal the insulated container holding the soldier. Even in this modern shell, he carries the weight of a century, and the mood is solemn but not heavy, like a whisper carried on cold air. The band plays low, their brass instruments fogging in the morning chill. The farmer, the soldier's distant relative, walks just behind the vehicle, his steps measured. He's refused the option of taking the soldier directly to a family plot in the valley. He stays close to the mountain, he told reporters the night before. His voice was calm, but there was no room for negotiation in it. Some people thought it strange, but most nodded in quiet agreement. The glacier had been his grave for longer than anyone had been alive to remember. As the procession winds up the narrow road toward the foot of the glacier, the air sharpens. The mountain looms above, its peaks catching the first orange of dawn. The soldiers march in unison, but their boots sound softer here, muffled by the snow-packed ground. At the halfway point, the road ends, and the last stretch must be walked on foot. The container is lifted onto a sled, guided by ropes, the movement slow and deliberate. You can hear the creak of leather harnesses, the crunch of boots, and nothing else. When they reach the site where the soldier was found, the lead officer gives a quiet command, and the men stand at attention. The glacier's surface glints under the morning light, the same blue-white wall that had hidden the soldier for decades. A priest steps forward, his breath visible as he begins the rites. The words echo strangely here, bouncing off rock and ice, as though the mountain itself is listening. Historians are still debating whether ceremonies in situ honor the dead more than traditional burials. But here, it feels like the only fitting choice. The container is open just enough for the priest to sprinkle holy water over the soldier's form. The droplets freeze almost instantly, tiny stars clinging to the fabric. The farmer steps forward, places his hand flat on the wrappings, and leaves it there for several long seconds. His lips move, but the words are for the soldier alone. You feel a prickle down your neck, not from the cold, but from the sense that you're watching a conversation only the two of them understand. Then something happens. A low, resonant crack ripples through the glacier, not sharp enough to alarm, but deep enough to still the air. The sound rolls down the slope like a drum beat. A few soldiers glance upward, scanning for signs of shifting ice, but nothing moves. The farmer doesn't step back. He keeps his hand in place until the sound fades. Later, he will say it felt like the mountain was saying goodbye. Others will say it was a warning not to come back. The container is closed, the ropes tightened, and the sled begins its slow descent back toward the valley. Behind it, the glacier remains unchanged, but you can't shake the feeling that something subtle has shifted. Maybe it's just the light. Maybe it's the knowledge that the soldier's story has left this place for the first time in 100 years. Either way, as the procession disappears down the trail, the mountain stands silent again, holding on to what it has left. A week after the repatriation ceremony, the village museum announces a special exhibit, Relics from the Glacier. The banner is modest, but the turnout on opening day is anything but. Locals arrive in their Sunday best, the same clothes they wear to weddings and funerals, while tourists spill in with cameras slung around their necks, ready to capture something authentic to take home. The air in the small stone building feels charged, part reverence, part curiosity, part commerce. Inside, the display cases gleam under soft yellow lighting. At the center, in a climate-controlled glass box, rests the soldier's letter. Still sealed, the wax cracked just enough to hint at fragility. Beside it is the faded photograph of the woman, now mounted on archival backing, her faint smile immortalized for anyone willing to lean close. The wooden knight from the chess set stands slightly apart, as if guarding the other objects. A placard explains where each was found, though the words read more like poetry than inventory. The farmer stands in the corner, hands in his pockets, watching the visitors drift from case to case. He doesn't stop anyone, doesn't offer commentary. Later, he'll say the relics belong to the village now, just as the soldier did. Still, you catch the way his eyes narrow slightly when a tourist presses too close to the glass, phone out, snapping a burst of pictures. Historians are still debating whether public display honors history or turns it into spectacle. And in this room, that tension hums under the warm lights. A young boy tugs his mother toward the case holding the chess piece. "Can I touch it?" he asks. The answer is quick and firm. No. But the boy stares at it anyway, his reflection overlapping with the carved knight's wooden face. For a second, it looks like they're locked in some silent challenge across the glass. His mother pulls him away, and the knight returns to its stillness, unchanged but somehow more alive for having been noticed. Not all reactions are quiet. A man near the letter mutters that it should be opened, that whatever's inside is part of the soldier's story and belongs to everyone. Across the room, a woman counters sharply, saying the seal should never be broken, that the soldier didn't live for public consumption. Voices rise, but the museum attendant steps in, speaking softly until the argument dissolves into uneasy silence. The glass cases remain untouched, but the question lingers in the air like frost. As the day wears on, you notice how differently people move through the exhibit. Some skim past the placards, glancing at each object like items on a checklist. Others linger, faces close to the glass, reading and rereading the captions as if each might change the second time. A few stand back entirely, taking in the room as a whole, the hum of the climate control, the smell of polished wood, the faint creak of the floorboards under shifting feet. When the doors finally close for the night, the farmer stays behind with the curator. Together they walk the length of the display, stopping at each case, not speaking much. At the letter, they pause longest. The farmer tilts his head slightly, as if listening for something. The curator doesn't ask what he hears. Some things, like the sound of a glacier cracking or the meaning of a sealed envelope, belong to the listener alone. Outside, the streets are quiet, the museum's windows glowing softly in the dark. Inside those cases, the relics wait, not for the next crowd, but for the next thaw, the next shift in the mountain that might bring more of their story to light. It starts quietly. A few photos from the museum exhibit posted on a local tourism page. The images are simple, almost respectful. The letter under glass, the carved chess knight, the soldier's boots worn thin at the soles. But within days, they're being shared far beyond the valley, picked up by travel bloggers, history channels, and eventually major news outlets. Headlines appear in quick succession. Frozen hero returns home, love letter lost in ice, the glacier that keeps secrets. The soldier's real story is still being pieced together, but online he's already become a dozen different versions of himself. By the time a national network sends a crew to the village, the narrative has shifted again. Now he's not just a soldier, he's a romantic figure who died trying to deliver a message to his beloved. No one knows if that's true. The letter remains sealed. But the idea is irresistible to audiences scrolling on their phones at midnight. Hashtags appear, edits with slow piano music overlay the photos, and soon the comment sections are full of people claiming they've never cried over history until now. Historians are still debating whether this kind of attention helped preserve the truth or buries it deeper under sentiment. The farmer's face starts showing up in interviews, though he's never agreed to half of them. One clip, filmed without his consent, captures him leaving the museum, head down, muttering something about stories that aren't yours to tell. It gets reposted with captions about his emotional connection, even though the moment was more frustration than grief. On the internet, the difference doesn't matter. Anything can be bent into the shape people want to see. Even stranger are the conspiracy theories. Some insist the soldier was a spy. Others claim the glacier is hiding dozens more bodies the government refuses to acknowledge. A viral thread suggests the mountain itself chooses when to release its dead. An idea that might have stayed harmless folklore if it hadn't been turned into clickbait with ominous background music. The comments swing between awe, skepticism, and outright hostility, as if the frozen soldier were a political figure instead of a man who died a century ago. Tourists start showing up with printed screenshots of maps, trying to find the exact spot where he was uncovered. Some make it halfway before turning back. A few reach the site, planting little flags or leaving flowers directly on the glacier. The guides shake their heads. The extra foot traffic risks destabilizing the area. But the flow doesn't stop. Each photo posted online is another invitation for someone else to come see for themselves. One night, scrolling through your own feed, you come across a heavily edited video of the repatriation ceremony. The crack in the glacier's surface has been slowed down and looped. The sound deepened until it feels like a growl. The caption reads, "The mountain didn't approve." You close the app, but the image lingers, feeding the quiet thought that maybe the glacier isn't finished with this story. Back in the valley, the museum's visitor numbers triple. The curator quietly replaces the guest book after running out of space in just 3 weeks. Many entries are heartfelt, but some read like scavenger hunts. Here for the letter? Where's the chest piece? When will you open it? The relics haven't changed, but the crowd around them has. And you can't help wondering how much of the soldier's real life can survive the versions people have decided to believe. It happens in the middle of January, deep in the quietest stretch of winter. The tourist crowds have thinned, the museum is back to its slower rhythm, and the mountain seems content to keep its remaining secrets buried. Then one morning, the farmer wakes to find his phone buzzing nonstop. Not from journalists this time, but from neighbors. Overnight, something on the glacier has shifted. By noon, a small group has hiked up to the site where the soldier was found. The sky is heavy with low clouds, and the snow underfoot feels unusually soft, as if it's been disturbed. The ice wall where the soldier emerged last summer now bears a long, vertical fissure. Not a crack from melting, but a deep, clean split that runs several meters down. Through it, faint shapes can be seen, blurry and pale, like figures caught in thick glass. No one can tell if they're more soldiers, rocks, or tricks of light, but everyone agrees on one thing. Those shapes weren't visible before. The farmer stands at the edge, arms crossed, not saying much. When someone suggests calling the scientist back, he just shakes his head. "They'll come soon enough," he says quietly, though you can't tell if he means it as a warning or a prediction. The glacier hums faintly in the cold air, not the sharp crack of danger, but a low, resonant sound that seems to pulse under your boots. Historians are still debating whether such noises are purely geological or if they carry hints of movement deeper inside. That night, a storm sweeps over the peaks, hiding the fissure under fresh snow. But the story spreads through the valley faster than the wind. Some say the shapes are the soldiers' lost companions, finally stirring. Others claim the mountain is answering the noise and attention of the past months, reminding everyone that it reveals its dead on its own schedule. A few older villagers mutter that such things happen in cycles, and that another thawing is due before the decade's end. By morning, the storm has passed, and the fissure is harder to see, its edges softened by the snowfall. But if you stand in the right light, the shapes are still there, faint, ghostly, unmoving. The guides who lead small, respectful treks up to the glacier warn visitors not to get too close, both for safety and for the simple reason that some things are better seen from a distance. Back in the village, the museum curator places a new sign near the soldiers' exhibit. History does not end where we expect it to. She doesn't elaborate, but the visitors seem to understand. The farmer visits the museum that afternoon, stopping at the letters display as always. This time, he lingers longer than usual, tapping the glass lightly before walking away without a word. That night, you dream of the glacier, not as an enemy, not even as a grave, but as something alive and listening. In the dream, the fissure widens just enough for a hand to slip through. You can't tell if it's reaching for help or offering it. The convoy rolls into the valley just after dawn. A string of white vans, heavy equipment trucks, and a single satellite uplink vehicle that looks like it belongs more on a movie set than in a mountain village. The international research team steps out in matching parkas, their badges swinging from bright lanyards. Cameras follow them immediately. The press has caught wind of their mission. They aren't here for the museum or the repatriation ceremonies. They're here for what still sleeps inside the glacier. Their lead scientist, a tall woman with frost-pink cheeks and an accent that slips between English and German, explains their method to the gathered locals. She talks about ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and something called micro-resonance acoustic mapping. You're not sure if the villagers are impressed or wary, but you can see the farmer standing at the back, arms crossed, watching without expression. Historians are still debating whether high-tech interventions on sites like this preserve history or disturb it beyond repair. By midday, the team has hauled their instruments up the slope to the fissure that appeared weeks ago. The area is cordoned off with bright tape, but locals have already gathered at the safe distance line, sipping from thermoses and murmuring in the thin, cold air. The radar unit looks like a cross between a sled and a cannon, and when it fires its first low-frequency pulse into the ice, you feel the vibration in your chest. The glacier hums back, a deep, resonant note that makes the hair on your arms stand up. The data starts coming in as rippling lines on a monitor, each peak and valley representing a change in density. The technicians adjust the settings, zooming in, and slowly shapes begin to emerge on the display. Jagged at first, then more defined. You lean closer. They're not random. They're not rock. They're aligned like a row. Someone whispers, "Bodies." Another voice counters, "Could be gear." The scientist says nothing yet, her eyes locked on the screen. In the village below, word spreads fast. By late afternoon, the cafe is buzzing with theories. One man swears the scans showed helmets. A woman insists she saw a shape that looked like a horse. On the internet, blurry screenshots of the monitor are already circulating, labeled with arrows and red circles. No one agrees on what's inside the glacier, but everyone agrees on one thing. It's not empty. Back at the fissure, the scientists run one final sweep before the light fades. This time, the machine picks up something unexpected. A hollow space several meters wide, deep beneath the ice. The lead scientist studies the readout for a long moment, then shuts the machine off. "We'll need to come back," she says, her voice quiet but edged with something like anticipation. The farmer just shakes his head, muttering as he turns away. The mountain decides when it's ready. That night, the valley feels different. It's not just the cold or the silence. It's the knowledge that there's something down there, sleeping in the dark, and that strangers from across the world are determined to wake it. Whether that's a rescue or a trespass is something no one agrees on. By morning, the community center is filled with the sound of boots on wooden floors and the low murmur of voices trying to stay civil. The international team has requested a meeting with the villagers, and nearly everyone has shown up. The lead scientist stands at the front with a laptop projecting a 3D model of the glacier, the hollow space rendered in glowing blue. It looks like the inside of a seashell, smooth, curling inward, impossible to see without the scan. She explains their plan: drill a narrow, controlled shaft to insert a camera, collect visual data, and then seal the hole to minimize environmental impact. Her tone is calm, measured, as if she's reciting something practiced. The farmer, seated near the front, leans back in his chair with his arms crossed. "You drill into that," he says, "and you change it. Forever." His voice is quiet but carries to every corner of the room. A younger villager asks what they think is inside. The scientist hesitates, then says, We believe it may contain preserved materials from the First World War, possibly multiple individuals. The conditions suggest they could be remarkably intact. The words multiple individuals ripple through the room like a gust of cold air. Someone mutters about disturbing the dead. Someone else says that leaving them is worse. Historians are still debating whether unearthing such remains honors their memory or violates it. One of the technicians chimes in, talking about the importance of documenting history before climate change accelerates the glacier's melt. It's going to come out eventually, and he says, and when it does, it might be destroyed. This way, we can control the process. An older woman in the back stands up, her hands trembling but her voice steady. Control, she says. That's what you think you have here? She gestures toward the peaks visible through the windows. No one controls that. The room divides quickly. Some villagers see the research as an opportunity, a way to bring more recognition, maybe even funding, to the struggling valley. Others see it as an intrusion, a disruption of something the mountain has chosen to keep hidden. A man near the door says he lost his grandfather on this very front and doesn't want strangers deciding how to handle what's left of him. The lead scientist listens, nodding, taking notes, but her eyes keep flicking to the projection of the hollow space. It's not greed exactly, but a kind of hunger, the look of someone who's glimpsed an answer to a question they've been chasing for years. The farmer notices it too. When the meeting adjourns, he walks past her without a word. But later, outside, you see him standing alone, looking up at the glacier as if weighing something only he can measure. That night, the valley feels heavier than the snow that covers it. The hollow space is still there, silent, untouched, but now it has become more than an absence in the ice. It's a choice, and choices here are rarely simple. The drilling rig arrives before sunrise, hauled up the slope on a tracked vehicle that leaves deep grooves in the snow. A thin line of villagers watches from the designated safety perimeter, their breath clouding in the cold. Some are here out of protest, others out of curiosity, and a few, like the farmer, out of a sense of duty, as if their presence might somehow balance what's about to happen. The research team moves with quiet efficiency, setting up the drill's stabilizers, checking the angle, and feeding a fiber optic cable through a winch. The first bite of the drill into the ice is strangely gentle, a slow, grinding hum that sounds almost like a saw through wood. You can feel the vibration in your boots, a faint tremor that climbs your legs. The lead scientist keeps one eye on the pressure gauges and the other on the laptop screen, displaying real-time footage from the borehole camera. At first, it's just blue-white ice, air bubbles suspended like stars in glass. 50 centimeters in, a hollow note rings through the rig. The sound is subtle, but enough to make two of the technicians glance at each other. Change in density, one says. They keep going. At 1 meter, the feed shows a faint, shadowed curve, smooth, unnatural in shape. The camera focuses, pixels resolving into what might be fabric. Not new fabric, but aged. The weave thick, edges stiff with frost. Then the tremor comes. It's not loud, but it's deep, a low-frequency roll that feels as if it's coming from under everything. The ice, the rock, the air itself. Snow shakes from the edges of the fissure. The lead scientist signals to halt. The drill stops mid-turn, and the sudden silence is heavier than the sound. Historians are still debating whether such glacial noises are warnings or just mechanical coincidences. But here, no one doubts it means stop. The farmer takes a step toward the rig. That's enough, he says. His voice isn't raised, but it cuts through the cold. The lead scientist hesitates, glances at the gauges, then back at the camera feed where the fabric still flutters slightly, as though stirred by a breath from somewhere deeper. We're this close, she says, almost to herself. But the tremor comes again, this time shorter, sharper, like something shifting. In the end, they pull the drill back, the borehole no deeper than a man's forearm. The camera is retrieved, its lens crusted with ice. The fabric on the recording is still there, but so is something else, a faint outline beyond it, curved and rigid, that no one can identify in the moment. They pack up in silence, the villagers dispersing without a word. That night, the hollow space remains untouched, but it feels closer somehow, as if the distance between the living and whatever's inside has been reduced by more than just a meter of ice. In the quiet, you can almost imagine it listening, The storm comes in fast, faster than any forecast predicted. By mid-morning, the mountains are swallowed in a white blur, wind howling like a living thing. Snow drives sideways, stinging your face, and even the research team's heavy parkas seem flimsy against the cold's relentless bite. Down in the village, shutters slam shut and shopkeepers sweep snow away from doorways that fill again within minutes. Up on the glacier, the drill site vanishes in less than an hour. The bright orange safety tape flaps once, twice, then disappears entirely under the mounting drifts. The narrow borehole the scientists made is sealed in seconds, smoothed over by the wind as if it never existed. By noon, the fissure itself is barely visible, just a faint depression in an otherwise perfect field of white. The mountain, it seems, has pulled the blanket back over itself. When the blizzard finally breaks, the research team treks back up, their boots sinking deep into the fresh snow. They carry shovels, but the lead scientist calls them off after only a few minutes. The GPS coordinates match, but the landscape does not. The hollow space still exists, somewhere beneath their feet, but now the path to it has been reset. The farmer, watching from a short distance, mutters, "Told you, the mountain decides." In the cafe that evening, the debate reignites. Some villagers call it a sign, a warning to leave the glacier alone. Others argue it's just weather, nothing mystical about it. Historians are still debating whether historical preservation is ever worth risking natural disruption, but here the question feels sharper. Is this preservation or is it trespass? The research team holds a closed-door meeting that night. When they emerge, their decision is cautious but firm. They will pause operations until spring. The lead scientist insists it's for safety, but you catch the way her gaze flickers toward the peaks as she says it. It's the look of someone who isn't sure if they're being prudent or being told no. As you walk home through the snow-packed streets, the air feels heavy with more than just cold. Somewhere high above, beneath that pristine white surface, the hollow space waits. Whether it's a tomb, a vault, or something stranger, it's no less unreachable now than it was a century ago. And maybe for the moment, that's exactly how the mountain wants it. The first real thaw comes early that year. By late March, thin ribbons of meltwater snake down the mountain, cutting dark veins through the snow. The villagers say it's warmer than they can remember, though no one dares call it unusual. Unusual weather has a way of bringing unusual consequences here. You can hear the glacier long before you see it, the sound of dripping and shifting ice echoing down the valley like a slow, steady drum. One morning, a boy walking to school spots something bobbing in the shallow stream that runs alongside the road. At first, he thinks it's driftwood, but as he gets closer, he sees the dark gleam of metal beneath a skin of frost. He wades in without thinking, the water shockingly cold, and hauls it onto the bank. It's a helmet, dented, rim-lined with a faint green patina, the leather chin strap brittle and broken. There's still a smear of ice inside, clinging stubbornly like a secret. By the time the farmer arrives, the boy is surrounded by curious onlookers. He kneels, turning the helmet in his hands, his fingers tracing a faint emblem etched into the side. Not the standard insignia, but a personal mark, scratched deep and deliberate. Historians are still debating whether such markings were common among soldiers or if they were rare, private talismans. Whatever its origin, it's unlike any the farmer has seen in the museum's collection. Word spreads quickly. The helmet is carried to the museum, wrapped in cloth to protect the metal from the warmer air. The curator examines it under a magnifying lamp, noting the way the ice inside is melting in uneven streaks. Beneath it, faint letters begin to appear, the remnants of handwriting. The farmer leans in. It's not a name, it's a date, and it's weeks later than the soldier's official time of death. In the cafe that night, the talk is split between excitement and unease. Some say the helmet belonged to another soldier still trapped in the glacier, one who may have survived longer than anyone thought. Others whisper about the hollow space the scientists found. Maybe the relic drifted out from there, carried by meltwater like a message. The research team, still in the valley, offers to analyze it, but the villagers are wary now, reluctant to hand over something that feels like it's been sent to them directly. The helmet is placed on display in the museum the next day, positioned beside the sealed letter. Two objects from the same war, separated by a century, now sitting side by side. Visitors lean in close, studying the date, the mark, the curve of the dent. No one can say for sure who wore it, but everyone agrees on one thing. It's a sign the glacier hasn't finished speaking. That night, the meltwater runs faster, carrying flecks of ice down through the valley. You can't help but wonder what else might be floating just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to surface. It starts as a whisper in the corner table of the cafe. Three men and a woman leaning in close, their mugs of coffee going cold as they trade half-formed plans. They don't trust the scientists to handle the glacier the right way, and they don't want outsiders to be the first to see whatever else might be up there. By the time the cafe closes, they've agreed. They'll go themselves. No fanfare, no permits. Just before dawn when the valley is still asleep. The next morning, they slip out one by one, each carrying a pack with ropes, crampons, and an old thermos of tea. The farmer spots them heading toward the trail and says nothing, only tipping his cap as they pass. The snow is still firm from the night frost, and the air is sharp in their lungs. They move quickly at first, their breath pluming behind them, until the slope steepens and the glacier's pale surface rises ahead like a frozen wall. They skirt the fissure, or where it used to be before the blizzard sealed it, and head toward a lower ridge where meltwater has carved narrow channels through the ice. There, the woman spots something glinting beneath a thin crust. She scrapes carefully with her gloved hands until a small metal tag comes free, its surface etched with a series of numbers. Historians are still debating whether such tags were standard issue in this theater of the war, or if they were improvised by soldiers in the field. Encouraged, they push higher, following a dark vein in the ice that seems to lead upward. Halfway along, one man's boot strikes something hollow. They dig quickly, revealing a wooden box no larger than a loaf of bread, its corners reinforced with tarnished brass. The wood is warped from decades in the cold, but it's intact. No one dares open it here, not with the wind picking up and the sky dimming with the promise of snow. On the way down, they move slower, the box strapped to one man's back like contraband. When they reach the village, they take it not to the museum, but to the back room of the cafe, where the lights are dim and the door is locked. The latch on the box is stiff, but finally it snaps open with a sound like brittle bone. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, is a stack of photographs, sepia-toned, edges curled, faces staring out from another century. One photo makes them all pause. It's the soldier from the glacier, unmistakable in his uniform, but not alone. Beside him stand four others, each with the same insignia scratched onto their helmets. And in the background, half buried in snow, is the outline of something large. Something that could be the entrance to the hollow space the scientists scanned. They exchange looks, unspoken questions passing between them. Whatever is in that hollow isn't just history. It's connected to the man they've been calling the frozen soldier, and maybe to the rest who never came home. The photographs lie scattered across the cafe's back table, edges curling upward under the weight of a century. No one speaks at first. The only sounds are the hiss of the radiator and the occasional clink of ceramic when someone shifts their coffee cup. The woman picks up the image of the soldier and his four companions, running her thumb over the insignia on their helmets. If this gets out, she says quietly, the scientists will take over. The glacier will be crawling with them. One of the men leans forward, elbows on the table. And if we don't say anything, it just sits here while the ice melts away up there. What happens when the spring runoff takes the rest? His voice carries the tension of someone torn between pride and fear. Historians are still debating whether artifacts belong to the land where they're found or to the shared record of humanity. But here that debate isn't academic, it's personal. The farmer who had followed them into the cafe but stayed silent until now finally speaks. You think you're keeping a secret, he says, but secrets have a way of walking downhill on their own. He gestures toward the photos. These faces, they belong to someone's history, not just yours. His words hang in the air, heavy enough to make everyone shift in their seats. Another man, the youngest of the group, shakes his head. No one from out there will understand what this place means. They'll treat it like a dig site, not a grave. He taps the image, showing the outline in the snow. And that, whatever it is, they'll tear it apart to get inside. The woman gathers the photographs into a stack, her hands trembling slightly. We could show them just the helmet and keep the rest, she suggests, her voice low. Let them think that's all the glacier gave us this year. The others exchange glances. It's a compromise, but compromises have a way of unraveling when too many eyes are watching. In the end, they agree to hide the photographs in a safe place, the farmer's barn, beneath a loose floorboard where the cold keeps everything dry. They'll decide later what to do, maybe when they know more, maybe never. The wooden box, now empty, will be left somewhere it can be found again, to make the discovery look like it ended there. As they leave the cafe, the farmer lingers, turning the cafe's key in his hand. Outside, the night is still, the glacier barely visible against the dark sky. He looks up at it for a long time before locking the door, as if waiting to see if the mountain approves of the choice they've made. It's 2 days after the agreement when the youngest of the group is seen heading toward the glacier before dawn. No one notices at first. Early hikes aren't uncommon here. But by afternoon, word begins to spread that he hasn't come back. His boots are missing from his porch, his pack gone from the hook, and his small sled, the kind used to haul gear, isn't in the shed. By evening, the cafe is buzzing with speculation. Some think he's gone to check the fissure again. Others whisper that he might have tried to find the hollow space on his own, driven by the outline in the photographs. The farmer sits quietly in the corner, saying nothing, but his eyes stay fixed on the window, where the mountains loom dark and unblinking against the fading light. A search party is formed the next morning. They follow the packed trail up the slope, boots crunching through refrozen meltwater, until they find the first sign, a dropped glove half buried in snow, fingers frozen stiff. Further up, near the ridge where the fissure used to gape, they spot drag marks in the snow, as if the sled had been pulled sideways into deeper drift. Historians are still debating whether such marks on ancient glacier surfaces are natural wind patterns or signs of human passage. Here, no one doubts the latter. They find the sled tipped on its side, half covered in wind-blown powder, but no pack, no footprints beyond. The trail simply stops at a patch of smooth ice, as if the mountain had pulled the rest inside. The wind picks up, carrying a low, hollow sound that could be distant ice shifting or something else. No one says it out loud, but everyone hears it. Back in the village, the photographs in the farmer's barn take on a different weight. The image of the soldier and his 4 companions feels less like history and more like a warning now. A reminder that some stories don't want to be followed. The woman from the group locks the barn door and keeps the key on her at all times. That night, you stand outside looking toward the glacier. Somewhere up there, maybe in that hollow space, the youngest villager has joined the frozen soldier in the mountain's long, unbroken silence. Whether he found what he was looking for or simply vanished into the ice is a question only the mountain can answer. And it's not speaking tonight. By midsummer, the glacier has pulled back farther than anyone in the valley can remember. Where there was once a sheer wall of ice, streaked with dirt and ancient air bubbles, now there's an uneven overhang, a mouth in the mountainside, dripping meltwater into a widening pool below. The sun, high and hot, strikes the ice at an angle that turns the meltwater into thin silver curtains, each stream breaking apart into mist before it hits the ground. From a distance, it almost looks like the glacier is breathing. You join the small crowd gathering at the base, boots sinking into the soft ground where frost has finally let go. No ropes, no drill rigs, just people squinting into the darkness beyond the thin veil of water. The air coming from inside is noticeably colder, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of rust and something else. A dry, dusty note that doesn't belong in a place made entirely of ice. Historians are still debating whether such scents can travel unaltered through decades of frozen entombment, but here it's undeniable. The farmer steps forward first, pulling back the edge of the dripping water with his hand. Inside, the space curves upward, the ice wall shimmering faintly in the dim light. Just a few feet in, something juts from the frozen wall, a length of wood, dark and splintered, with the warped shape of what could be a rifle stock. Its barrel is buried deeper, the ice clinging to it like a second skin. You feel a shiver despite the summer heat. A low murmur passes through the crowd. Some want to push in right away, break the ice and bring the relic out. Others warn about unstable melt and the risk of collapse. The lead scientist, who's been watching quietly from the edge, finally steps forward. "It's only the beginning," she says. If this thaw keeps up, we'll see more. Maybe all of it. Her voice carries both excitement and unease, as if she's not sure which she feels more. The farmer doesn't answer. Instead, he looks over his shoulder toward the village, as though expecting someone who isn't there. The youngest member of the secret group, the one who vanished, is still gone. And with this new opening, the question of what might be waiting inside is no longer hypothetical. By the time the sun dips low, the water flowing from the overhang has doubled. The hollow space breathes out another cold sigh, and the crowd thins, drifting back toward the village with more questions than they came with. You stay a little longer, watching the shadows inside shift as if something deeper in the ice is moving. That night, the moon is thin and low, casting just enough light to make the glacier gleam like pale steel. The crowd from earlier is gone, and the path up is quiet except for the faint trickle of meltwater finding its way downhill. 4 figures move quickly along the trail, hoods up, their breath white in the cool air. They carry no lanterns, only headlamps kept switched off until they reach the lip of the overhang. The woman from the Secret Keepers is among them. She's the first to step through the curtain of water, her boots crunching softly on the thin crust of ice inside. The cold hits immediately, sharper than the evening air outside, like stepping into a room where the windows have been open all winter. The beam of her headlamp slices through the dark, catching on the warped rifle stock embedded in the wall. A man behind her lifts his light higher, sweeping it across the curve of the hollow space. The ice glitters in shades of blue and green, fractured in places where summer heat has begun to pry it apart. And then the light catches something else. Cloth, a sleeve perhaps, protruding from a ridge near the ceiling. It's dark with age, but there's no mistaking the cuff and button of a uniform. Historians are still debating whether such high placement could be the result of shifting ice, or if it means the space was once open and accessible before sealing itself shut. They move deeper, careful to avoid the drip zones where water has polished the floor into slick glass. The woman spots another shape just ahead. A metal canteen, its strap still intact, hanging from a shard of ice as if set down moments ago. Beside it, the floor rises slightly, forming a mound with a faint outline beneath. No one says the word body, but everyone thinks it. Suddenly, the space groans. Not loud, but deep, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth. The beam from one man's light trembles as he glances upward. A thin crack races across the ceiling, spitting down a fine spray of ice dust. The woman steps back toward the entrance, but her light catches one final detail before she turns. A faint, almost deliberate mark scratched into the ice near the mound. Not letters, not numbers. Just the same insignia from the photographs in the farmer's barn. They leave quickly, retreating through the dripping curtain into the warmer night. No one speaks until they're halfway down the trail, the glacier shrinking behind them in the dark. And even then, they say nothing about the insignia. Some secrets, they seem to agree, are better kept inside the ice a little longer. By sunrise, the story has already made the rounds. No one says exactly who went in, but the number of people in the cafe leaning over their coffee cups with knowing smirks makes it obvious the secret is out. The woman from the group keeps her eyes on her mug, saying nothing, but the murmur of conversation has shifted. People aren't just talking about the hollow space anymore. They're talking about what might have been seen inside. At the museum, the lead scientist is already making calls before the doors even open. Her voice, calm but clipped, carries through the thin walls as she requests additional equipment and safety personnel. "We can't risk collapse," she says to someone on the other end. "But we also can't risk losing the site entirely." Her assistant scribbles notes, eyes darting between her and the window, where the glacier looms in the distance. By mid-morning, a convoy of snow vehicles is crawling up the trail, carrying drills, floodlights, and reinforced ladders. Villagers gather at the base to watch, arms crossed, faces set in expressions that are equal parts curiosity and distrust. Historians are still debating whether large-scale intervention preserves history or destroys it. Here, that question feels sharper than ever. The farmer arrives late, walking slowly up the path, with a look that makes people step aside without a word. He stops beside the woman from the Secret Keepers, who's watching the equipment disappear into the hollow space. "You went in," he says softly. Not a question. She doesn't deny it. Instead, she asks, "Do you think they'll find it?" He doesn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the curtain of meltwater. Finally, he says, if the mountain wants them to. Inside the hollow space, floodlights snap on one by one, turning the ice walls into sheets of glowing blue. The rifle stock is quickly tagged and documented, the canteen carefully removed. But no one mentions the cloth sleeve near the ceiling or the insignia on the mound. Whether it's gone or simply ignored is unclear. Back outside, the crowd thins as the afternoon wears on. The woman stays, watching as the scientists move deeper into the glacier. Part of her feels relief, the kind that comes when you hand over a burden, but another part feels a knot tightening in her stomach, the same knot that started the moment she saw that insignia glowing faintly in the ice. Inside the hollow space, the air is so still it feels heavy, as if it hasn't been disturbed in decades. The floodlights cast long, soft shadows across the walls, revealing new shapes where the ice has pulled back. The team moves slowly, their breath fogging in the beams of light, each step crunching over a layer of frost that has been undisturbed for generations. The first full figure appears near the far wall, a soldier, upright but leaning slightly forward as though frozen mid-step. His uniform is intact, the fabric stiff and pale from cold, the leather straps across his chest still buckled. The ice clings to his face in a thin glaze, but you can make out the faint suggestion of his features, eyes half open, mouth caught between words that never finished. Historians are still debating whether soldiers caught like this died instantly or remained trapped for hours, maybe days, as the cold consumed them. Beyond him, the scene expands. Two more soldiers stand together, one with a hand outstretched toward the other, the fingers just brushing a sleeve. Their helmets bear the same scratched insignia as the one in the farmer's photographs. The floodlights make the markings gleam faintly, as if the ice itself remembers the hand that carved them. At the center of the chamber is the mound from the night entry, now fully revealed as a makeshift table, a crate turned on its side with maps and letters still spread across it under a skin of frost. A lantern sits atop the crate, its glass cracked, the last flame long extinguished. The papers beneath are too fragile to touch, but the topmost one is legible enough to see a date, the same late date found inside the helmet. The team stands in silence, the weight of the moment pressing against the thin barrier between now and then. No one speaks. No one takes a step closer. Outside, the glacier groans, a deep, resonant sound that rolls through the chamber like a warning. Finally, the lead scientist lifts a hand, signaling the team to start documenting. Cameras click softly in the cold air. The shutter sounds muffled by the ice. Each soldier is photographed from every angle, each object noted. But there's a quiet understanding here. This isn't just a dig site. It's a room where time stopped, and stepping too far feels like trespassing into the last breath of another century. As they work, you notice the farmer standing just outside the hollow space, his eyes fixed on the scene. He doesn't move, doesn't speak. When he finally turns away, it's slow, deliberate, like someone closing a door that shouldn't be left open too long. The floodlights are switched off one by one, and the hollow space sinks back into darkness. The ice swallows the glow, the air grows heavier, and you can almost feel the century close over the soldiers again. Outside, the summer night is quiet, but you know the glacier hasn't finished its work. It never does. You walk back down the trail slowly, every crunch of your boots against gravel sounding too loud. Somewhere behind you, the mountain exhales, or maybe that's just the wind finding its way through a crack. Either way, you don't turn around. In the village, the windows are dark, the streets empty, the farmer's barn stands silent. But you know the photographs are still there under the floorboard, and you can't help wondering if they'll still be in the same order by morning. The glacier has already taken one person. It can wait for another. When you close your own door and shut out the night, the image stays with you. The frozen eyes, the outstretched hand, the insignia carved into the ice. These aren't ghosts. They're time itself, refusing to let go. Another page closed. Another memory gone up in smoke. Good night. Please rate the level of disaster on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments section, and subscribe to hear more stories about historical disasters before you go to sleep. Good night, peaceful, dreaming of forgotten ruins. Good night. See you in the dust of history.